Welcome, everybody, and I think in the interest of starting as close to 10:45 as we can so that we hopefully have time for some great Q&A and dialogue at the end of this panel. And to the point, the panel that you're in the room for is San Francisco Bay Area Communities and the Archival Record. Welcome to Stanford. My name is Ben Stone, curator for American and British history, and also I work in special collections where I'm one of the associate directors. It's great to be here in person with so many old friends and new ones to discuss the topic of this panel. Our panelists today will discuss ways in which community history is being preserved in the Bay Area, both in institutions and community-based archives, and discuss what is missing, as well as attempts to address these exclusions. We will have time for questions and dialogue with the audience. We will have 3 presentations, and I'll just say, unfortunately, our first presenter, Kelsi Evans, from the GLBT Historical Society, is unable to be with us, but she pre-recorded her presentation, so we'll be viewing that first. So as just a few brief words of introduction, the Bay Area, as we're all aware, is home to a rich and growing array of institutions and groups preserving histories of communities within the region, from the 19th century founding of the California Historical Society, the Bancroft Library, the Sutro Library, which were institutions often formed by elites whose main interest was the history of folks like themselves, leaders in business, commerce, and government, to a more diverse and representative group of institutions by the mid-20th century and later. And I'm just going to cite a few of these here, and some previous speakers have already mentioned some of them. The East Bay Negro Historical Society, which morphs over time into the Oakland, Northern California Center for Afro-American History and Life, and then more currently, the African American Museum and Library at Oakland. The Chinese Historical Society of America, the San Francisco History Center at the San Francisco Public Library, the GLBT Historical Society, the Japanese American Museum of San Jose, and the Freedom Archives, many of which are coming out of the 1960s and later. And then even more recently, followed by a new generation of community-based archives, including the East Palo Alto Community Archive and the Louise Lawrence Transgender Archive. I think I'd be remiss, and I'm building on powerful comments that were made in the previous session, to exclude the fact that too often the history of archives illustrates the theme of a powerful keynote address at the National Digital Stewardship Alliance given by archivist and activist Burgess Jules in 2016, an address I would urge you all to read called "Confronting Our Failure of Care Around the Legacies of Marginalized People in the Archives," in which he noted, quote, "The politics of what we've traditionally preserved means the archive is filled with silences, absences, and distortions, mostly affecting the legacies of the less privileged, including Black women, LGBTQ people, immigrants, poor people, and victims of police violence, to name a few." And I know, again, many of our speakers in the plenary panel before addressed some of those very, very concerns and issues. So now to introduce our panelists, and I will go in the order in which they will present. Kelsi Evans is the Director of Archives and Special Collections and Interim Co-Executive Director at the GLBT Historical Society in San Francisco. She has been working in the field of archives for over 13 years. Prior to her role with the Society, she worked on the AIDS History Project at the University of California, San Francisco Archives and Special Collections, and managed archival projects at the Fales Library of New York University, the Lowe Art Museum at the University of Miami, and the Foundation for Landscape Studies. She holds an MA in Archives and Public History from New York University and an MA in History from the University of California, Santa Cruz. Our second presenter, Carli V. Lowe, is the University Archivist at San Jose State University's Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. Library. Her work is focused on studying and developing practices that shift collecting strategies, expanding archival audiences, and improving the sustainability of archival institutions, with the goal of ensuring that archives are relevant to the present needs and prepared for future challenges. As a former elementary school teacher, Carli's interest in information science is rooted in her understanding of the power of information to transform individuals and communities. And our third and final speaker, Dr. Frank J. Omowale Satterwhite, is an organizational and community change consultant who completed a BA degree at Howard University, an MS degree at Southern Illinois University, and a PhD degree at Stanford University. Dr. Omo is the president of Leadership Incorporated, a nonprofit consulting firm focused on building capacity for social change in communities of color. He previously served as president of the National Community Development Institute, acting superintendent of the Ravenswood City School District, and the associate dean and chairman of African American Studies at Oberlin College. During his career as a nonprofit management consultant, he has assisted more than 1,200 organizations in 120 plus cities and 40 states. From 1979 to 1983, he was the lead organizer and campaign manager for the movement to incorporate the city of East Palo Alto. He now serves as co-manager of the East Palo Alto Community Archive, a 5-year project to collect, share, promote, celebrate, and preserve the unique history of the East Palo Alto community for future generations. So I think with that, I will ask our media colleagues to cue up Kelsi's presentation, which we will watch as she recorded it.
A remote recorded presentation today, and I want to thank you all for your understanding. I'm very pregnant, and I also have a 1-year-old at home, so I'm just trying to keep everyone COVID safe as much as I can. So thank you again, and thank you to the organizers for making accommodations. In today's talk, I'm going to introduce the GLBT Historical Society and our work, and then I'll get into a few specific examples of how we are continuing to build relationships within the diverse LGBTQ community to expand our holdings and ensure that all queer people see a part of themselves in the archives and in the historical narratives that we present at the museum. So what is the GLBT Historical Society? We were founded in 1985, and our mission is to collect, preserve, and share the history of LGBTQ people and culture with a special focus on Northern California. We have 2 sites, a museum in the Castro and the archives and reading room in the mid-market district of SF, sort of near the Tenderloin. We also have a lot of online offerings, including digital archival collections and digital exhibitions. So thinking about the topic of this conference, community history, and our panel's specific focus on how community history can fill gaps in the historical record and serve community needs, I think it's important to talk a little about the founding of GLBTHS and the factors that contributed to the creation of this organization. So as I said, we were founded in 1985 in San Francisco, and there were really 2 major contributing factors, the first being the AIDS epidemic. Beginning in the early 1980s, when AIDS emerged in San Francisco and New York, the effects on the queer community were devastating. It's really hard to even illustrate the enormity of the trauma. People were dying, often very young, and the community was combating illness alongside political apathy and tremendous fear, and often cruelty, from institutions ostensibly designed to help, including some of the medical establishment. So in the face of all this, you have this incredible resilience within the queer community as folks find ways to care for each other and demand action and change. The founders of the Historical Society in the 1980s are part of this community that's living through this epidemic, and they identify a need they want to address. They want to ensure that there is a trusted place within the community for the records of the lives that are being lost. As I said, many folks were dying young, often without wills, and often estranged from blood relatives, sort of legal next of kin. These blood relatives, if they were around, sometimes didn't understand the significance of what was being left behind, or they actively wanted to destroy those records. So the early collecting of the Historical Society was very much interwoven with this community effort to save queer historical material before it was lost or erased. The second major factor in the founding of the Society was the lack of collecting of LGBTQ material at universities and other institutions, and the attendant lack of trust with those institutions. Many of the founding members and early members of the GLBT Historical Society were community historians, so both professional academics and the sort of community keepers. Prior to the official founding of the organization in '85, these folks had been meeting to collect, share, and discuss queer historical material, including periodicals, secondary sources, and some personal papers and organizational records. These meetings provided a safe space for open discussion about queer history and offered access to vital resources to facilitate continued historical work. At this time, within major governmental and academic repositories, collecting scopes rarely explicitly focused on the collecting of LGBTQ material. Queer material was seen as unimportant or not grounded in deep history, too controversial, or it was excluded due to outright homophobia and anti-LGBTQ sentiment among the leaders of those institutions. As a result of this, you see queer people organizing LGBTQ community archives like the GLBT Historical Society to preserve and share the history on their own terms. Since our founding, we've remained an independent community archive. And while our staff has professionalized and the organization has grown, we remain committed to that original mission of preserving and sharing queer history. And to give you just a little idea of the breadth and scope of our collections, I'm going to quickly highlight a few of our holdings. These are really just a taste of the over 1,000 collections that we house and the countless stories that we have to share. We have the papers of Elsa Gidlow. She's recognized as writing the first book of openly lesbian poetry published in North America, called On a Gray Thread. It was published in 1923. She was also the founder of the Druid Heights Artist Colony in Marin County. And she's just this really great example of somebody who was out and proud in the 1920s and throughout her life. We have José Sarria's papers. Sarria was an opera singing drag star and political pioneer. He ran as an openly gay candidate for the San Francisco Board of Supervisors in 1961. He's also remembered as the founder of the Imperial Court System, which started as this sort of campy drag gay social club, and it's grown into a network of nonprofit charitable organizations throughout the world. We have Phyllis Lyon and Del Martin's collection. They were co-founders of the Daughters of Bilitis in the 1950s, two of the co-founders, which is the first lesbian organization in the United States. They were marriage equality advocates, and they had a couple of high-profile weddings, remarrying each other each time the laws changed. And sort of overall, they were lesbian icons and leaders in numerous LGBTQ and women's groups throughout their lives. We have Lou Sullivan's papers. Sullivan was a trans man and advocate for transgender people. He was one of the co-founders of the GLBT Historical Society. And he really had a deep understanding of the power of archives and history to impact contemporary queer lives. He kept detailed journals throughout his life and donated them to the society following his death. And they remain some of our most requested and used materials. And last, but certainly not least, we have Sylvester's collection. Sylvester was a beloved disco star and singer-songwriter. His hit, You Make Me Feel Mighty Real, released in 1978, continues to be recognized as one of the greatest disco songs ever. He was a truly unique person and proudly gender nonconforming before that term was really used. Prior to his death from AIDS in 1988, Sylvester spoke openly about his diagnosis and his experiences with the disease as a gay Black man, and he advocated for compassionate care of people with AIDS. Following his death, he bequeathed future royalties from his music to the AIDS organizations, Project Open Hand and the AIDS Emergency Fund. So while we have all of these amazing collections, we're also aware of the gaps within our holdings, and we've been working on ways to collaboratively diversify our permanent collection, engage underrepresented groups, and better document the wide array of queer experience. Any archive, even a community archive, can unfortunately replicate within the archives systems of oppression and privilege that exist in the broader social, cultural, and political setting. At GLBTHS, you see this demonstrated, for instance, through the underrepresentation in the archives of people of color, lesbians, trans people, and people with limited disposable income. So low-income folks, people who've dealt with housing insecurity, et cetera. To upset these systems, it takes a lot of things, but it at least takes explicit resource investment and concerted effort and transparency on the part of the organization. And for the remainder of my talk, I'm going to highlight 2 collecting projects that we've undertaken to start to better diversify our holdings and hopefully better represent the Bay Area's LGBTQ community. So the first collecting project is a partnership with the Lesbian Archives of Sonoma County. This group is an independent community archival group founded with the mission of documenting the involvement of lesbians in creating community for women in Sonoma County, beginning in the 1960s. LASC and GLBTHS began their relationship in 2017, when the leaders of LASC decided that they wanted to find a partner archive to donate some of their material to. LASC had grown, and women involved with the group had entrusted their personal papers to the archive. Members recognized that they didn't have the facilities or the staff to care for the material long-term and make it available to researchers and a broad audience in the way that they wanted. This need brought them to GLBTHS. We were a repository that was grounded in the community and shared a related mission. GLBTHS archival staff worked with LASC to build trust, including making site visits and talking through expectations on both sides. LASC ultimately decided to partner with GLBTHS as the official repository for LASC's archival material. We now have the Lesbian Archives of Sonoma County collection, and LASC continues to do their historical collecting and information sharing within the community. When they have a sort of critical mass of archival material, they work with GLBTHS archival staff to review content and make official additions to the collection of the society. Most recently, LASC completed a multi-year project to record oral histories with women involved in the Sonoma County lesbian scene. These recordings, including group discussions and individual recordings, provide amazing documentation of first-person accounts of lesbian and women's organizing. LASC donated these recordings and descriptive metadata in 2021, and we've dedicated GLBTHS staff time and digitization funds to preserving these audiovisual files and making them available online. And we plan to have that digital collection available in 2022. I wanted to highlight this partnership for a couple of reasons. One, it illustrates the important historical work community archival projects can achieve. LASC members are integral to the community that they are seeking to document, and this connection and knowledge can result in really fruitful collecting. Two, for GLBTHS, the partnership allows us to better document the lives of lesbians in more rural communities by building on LASC expertise and community connections. This partnership, based on collaborative goals and collecting, serves a community need and helps us achieve our goals of diversifying the archives. The second collecting project is the Calle 16 and Beyond Archives project. This project really started with an exhibit at the museum, and it's grown from there. In 2019, community curators Tina Valentin Aguirre and Juan Antonio Fernandez mounted an exhibit titled Chosen Familias, LGBTQ Latinx Stories. Our community curators program invites folks to propose, curate, and help design temporary exhibits at the museum, using both personally loaned material and material from the archives. Community curators are paid for their labor, and it provides an opportunity for folks to share their stories according to their own vision in partnership with the Society's curators. Following the exhibit, GLBTHS staff met with the community curators to discuss the possible donation of material loaned for the show to the archives. This grew into a larger conversation led by Aguirre about Latinx collecting more broadly in the archives. So we did some planning and collaborating about mutual goals, and recently launched a larger Latinx collecting project called the Calle 16 and Beyond Archives Project. San Francisco 16th Street, or Calle 16, has been a thriving corridor for LGBTQ Latinx people for years. Recently, like many places in the city, the neighborhoods on 16th have faced increasing rent and redevelopment, so the historic queer spaces that make up this unique area are at risk of being lost. The Calle 16 project aims to document the lives, businesses, and culture of 16th Street and other LGBTQ Latinx neighborhoods in San Francisco. This archival collecting project really relies on relationships of trust and community engagement that were started before an archival donation ask was ever made. Aguirre has been central in making connections and inviting non-Latinx archival staff, myself included, into community settings where we can hear from folks about what kind of history making they're interested in, how the archives might be of service to the community, and what they envision for an LGBTQ Latinx collecting project. While we have accessioned collections through this project into the archives, we are equally focused on building relationships within the community and guiding our work based on the needs and timelines of the community. And I wanted to highlight this project because I think it illustrates the importance of archival organizations investing and participating in the communities they hope to better document before moving right into the kind of extractive collecting model. In archives, we talk a lot about trust. And when we're thinking about filling gaps in our collections and better documenting underrepresented groups in our archives, we need to remember that trust is built over time and through our actions. Organizations need to demonstrate in concrete ways to those communities that their needs are centered, their history is valued, and that they can play an active role as partners and collaborators in shaping how the archives collects, preserves, and shares their historical material. And with that, I will wrap up. Thank you again. Hopefully I will be able to be remotely there for questions, but if I'm not, please feel free to email me. My email's there, kelsi@glbthistory.org. Thank you again.
Hello. Let's see. My name is Carli Lowe. I'm the University Archivist at San Jose State. And I'm really thankful to be here today and getting to learn from my fellow panelists and from others in this room and getting to see some familiar faces. This is my first in-person conference in a long time, so getting to see some people in the community who I'm really excited to connect with today. I'm going to tell you about a project called Black Spartans. I came to San Jose State in the summer of 2019 as the first full-time university archivist in the library. There were other archivists, but I was the first one dedicated to university history. And I was also, and still am, the only Black faculty in the library. Upon my arrival, I was almost immediately approached with questions from researchers, especially Black researchers, about Black histories, past and present experiences of Black communities on campus. People wanted to know things like who were the earliest Black students, who were the earliest Black faculty and staff. And of course, I didn't have the answers because I had just gotten there and I'm not a historian, I'm an archivist. And so I started asking the questions I was being asked. And the answers that I got very much fell in line with these accepted dominant narratives of the university. We are a majority-minority campus, and it's something that we put out, that we tout a lot, almost as if it's a virtue. This phrase, the diversity university, is often used. People told me when I asked them, do we know when the first Black student arrived on campus, they would tell me, oh, we've always been diverse. We've always accepted Black students and all students. They told me that we have great programs and have always had great programs for supporting our Black students and other students of color. My innate skepticism and personal life experience growing up in the Bay Area didn't allow me to accept these answers. And so I started to think about how I might be able to use my position at the university to answer these questions. One of the first things that I did was to assess our current holdings. Archivists like to talk about things in linear feet, so I went through our collections and I looked at how many linear feet address different topics. I found that out of 1,844 linear feet of university archives collections, only 18 linear feet were explicitly related to either students of color or social justice movements. I combined those numbers because when I separated them, they were too small. So looking at those two topics. So it was no wonder that researchers were struggling to find records on Black histories on campus. I started to discuss this issue with our special collections librarian, Kate Steffens, who's my partner in this project. And it turned out she shared my concerns. And so we began to talk together about how we might make a project to make the information that we did have more accessible, to create guides for researchers to find what little that we did have, because some of what we have is buried. Susan was talking about this morning. Sometimes the information is there, but it's buried in other collections and not described in a way that makes it easy to find. So creating research guides, and then using what we know about what we do have to figure out what we don't have and what we need to look for, and then doing the work to build our collections on Black histories. So we made this whole plan. We had a whole list of physical collections we were going to review, and then the pandemic struck. And we were all sent home, and we no longer had access to our physical collections. So how do we do this research? How do we keep this idea going? Then, as we're contemplating this, comes the summer of 2020, and suddenly I'm hearing from many fellow CSU archivists that they're interested in surfacing Black histories on their campus. To be fair, some of them were doing this work before the summer of 2020, but many more made it a priority starting at that time. So we started to meet together and share strategies and ideas, and out of those conversations came the idea to start with our digitized student newspapers. A lot of us had our student newspapers fully digitized, keyword searchable. So we worked together, we created a shared spreadsheet, we developed a list of keywords that we would use to search the newspapers. And we started systematically searching year by year. So I searched all the 1930 newspapers for the word Negro to see where it appeared, for words like colored, and also organizations like the Negro Youth Association, different terms that we had discovered to help us find some of this information. These keywords led us to names of specific Black students. Those names we were able to then look up in our yearbooks and learn more. We found people's pictures, we found different activities on campus that they were involved in. And then those yearbooks, thankfully by then, we had some days back on campus, and the yearbooks led us back to the physical collections where we were able to go into, the yearbooks would tell us this student was a member of such and such organization, and then we can go into our physical collections where we have records of these student organizations and find something like a teeny tiny photograph where way in the back you can see that one student who was the only Black student in that organization who we otherwise wouldn't have ever known to look in that particular folder for. A chance find in the Friends of the Library bookstore on campus revealed the name of the first Black woman to graduate from San Jose State. Her name was Lucy Turner. Once she was married, Lucy Turner Johnson. She attended from 1905 to 1907. She got her teaching degree, though we haven't been able to confirm whether she was ever able to actually work as a teacher. She went on to be very involved in her community, volunteering with the Red Cross and being the chairman of forestry for the California State Federation of Colored Women. Searching the Spartan Daily revealed the name of one of the second Black women to attend and graduate from the university, Pharisida Hall, later known as Pharisida Hall Wyatt. She attended from 1932 to 1935. She majored in speech. She was on the debate team. She was in the San Jose Players Club, which was a theater club. She was the secretary of the Cosmopolitan Club, which seems to have been like the multicultural students of color organization on campus at the time. She went on to become a lieutenant in the Women's Army Corps during World War II. In 1958, she became chief secretary to Democratic Congressman Jeffrey Colin. She taught at Skyline High School in Oakland. She was a painter and an author. She published 2 books of poetry, one of which we were able to acquire for our rare book collection as a result of this research. Her papers are at the African American Museum and Library of Oakland, which I hope to spend some time looking through one day. There's a 25-year gap between Lucy Turner and Pharisida Hall, which definitely raises some questions that I have some theories about, but no answers yet. There were several other Black women who attended at the same time as Pharisida Hall, but I don't know for sure too much about their lives. They're named in the newspaper, but they're not pictured. And then Pharisida Hall appears in pictures like this with groups of other Black women, but you can see the only caption on this image says dark rhythms. And we don't know the names of the women in that photograph. And this is a repeated problem in our records. Black students will be named but not pictured, or pictured but not named. Other patterns arose in our research. Black students were often acknowledged for accomplishments in sports and entertainment, but rarely were their academic achievements or other interests described. For example, the only picture we have of Hal Capers here is from the track team page of the yearbook, whereas other athletes are pictured with their sports teams, and also in class portraits, many of the Black students are only pictured with their sports teams. Hal Capers' athletic accomplishments are listed in the newspapers, but not anything about what he studied when he was here. There's also ample evidence, hopefully this doesn't surprise any of you, that racism was as much a problem on our campus as on other campuses. Often on one page of the yearbook, we'd find some information about a Black student and what they were achieving, and turn the page and find some images from some campus event where plenty of white people were appearing in blackface. There are whole pages of the yearbook with lists of racist jokes. Mentions of Black students often include reference to their size and skin tone. And Black athletes were regularly given animalistic nicknames. Once we had collected some of this information, I started to get questions from people who were hearing what we were working on. How do we get access to this information? And I thought, fair question. We started the project in response to questions. How do we get the answers back to the people who are asking the questions? And so we took the research that we had so far, and we created both a physical and a digital exhibit that opened for this past Black History Month. There was a physical exhibit of portraits and related archival materials on the second floor of the library that ran through April 1st. And what's important about that is our library is a joint project with the public library. So it's not just a university library for university students, but a space that the public can go through as well. We also created a digital exhibit of scrapbooks that lives in perpetuity in SJSU digital collections. I'll put up the website at the end of the presentation. As of March, that collection had over 5,000 visits. We also partnered with a digital media art student to create portraits. So we weren't just using these kind of fuzzy, not so well done black and white images of our students, but we reached out to a Black student who was interested in creating art in response to the research. She reviewed our research to develop an understanding of each student as a unique individual and created symbologies to represent their multifaceted realities. Here you see William Molden. He was on campus from 1935 to 1941. He was a contemporary of Pharisida Hall. He performed poetry as part of the Negro verse-speaking choir. He competed in soccer and boxing. I believe he was our first Black soccer player on campus. He was a member of the radio club and held a public demonstration of a Tesla coil in 1936. He was also a member of the aviation club Alpha Eta Rho and earned his solo flying license. And you'll see images reflecting those experiences in the portrait that the student created. The student, by the way, is Yab Kebede, and very talented and for hire. Can't forget to promote her. Creating this required broad involvement from within and beyond special collections and archives, and it was important to us ethically that we made sure that all the labor was compensated and acknowledged. We listed everyone who worked with us on the website. We were able to work with another faculty member who had a grant, and with that grant money, we were able to pay Yab, the student artist, for all of her incredible work creating the portraits. And we also sought sponsorships from within and beyond campus, and they brought their own networks with them, which meant that we were able to reach a broader audience than if we'd just been doing the outreach from the library alone. We believe that we succeeded in our goal to surface undertold histories, though we continue to work on the project. There's still more work to do. But the information we've uncovered so far impacted ongoing research. For example, Willie Steele, who is a person of interest for several researchers, he's known for winning a gold medal at the 1948 Olympics and is also known as a graduate of San Diego State. But our research established that he actually began his track career at San Jose State, 1942 to 1943, before he left to fight in World War II, and then coming back from the war, he went home to San Diego, and that's how he ended up a San Diego State graduate. We're currently looking for other opportunities to connect communities with this information. We have a possible exhibit at public library branches in San Jose in June. I've been reaching out to local organizations, such as the San Jose chapter of Jack and Jill, and Black churches, such as Antioch Baptist, which is actually Lucy Turner Johnson was a member there. And I'm reaching out to discuss opportunities for collaboration, information, and resource sharing. I'm reaching out with the intention of how can I put the information we've found at the service of you and in the community, and also open to people. All of the research we did is from records that are fully available to the public. So engaging more people in doing this kind of research, we can find so much more than Kate and I can, find in the little time that we have. The more we get this information off campus, the more likely we are to make connections with people who have information to share that we wouldn't otherwise have access to. We're continuing to research Black experiences on campus going forward from 1948 and trying to learn more about the students we've already discovered. And we are intending to expand this model to researching experiences of other marginalized communities on campus. I hope you will visit the digital collection. It's kind of a long URL, but if you Google SJSU Library Exhibits Black Spartans, you'll find it. If any of this inspired you to share related research or even family stories, I would love to hear from you. I'd also love to hear ideas for where else we might be able to share this project or find opportunities for collaborations. Thank you.
It's quite an honor and a pleasure to be invited to participate on a panel with Kelsi and Carli, such a distinguished group of people who do this work with excellence all the time. And I'm not sure who's in the audience, but I'm just a voice for a group of community people who are building an archive in East Palo Alto. And the co-manager with me is Sharifa Wilson. There'll be a slide on this. Our archivist is Sonia Carlson. There's a fairly diverse community team, and there's a really, really talented group of professionals who are supporting our work, who I'll reference going forward. We're new, we're energized, we're excited, and we have the opportunity to now share, but because of what we're hearing, we also are in a space where we can learn. I'm not sure why that slide is so bright, but it's everywhere we go, we also do a land acknowledgement. And the land on which we inhabit is physically located in the original ancestral homelands of the Ohlone indigenous peoples. And we pay respect to the indigenous peoples, their past, present, and future, and their continuing presence in their homeland and throughout their historical diaspora. So today I'm going to talk about 4 things: why and who this archive is, our process, our progress, and our future, and the various subtopics there you can see. So first, why an archive and who? Given the rate of gentrification in East Palo Alto, the purpose and point of the archive is to preserve the history of our community and share our story for generations to come. I mean, there are a lot of reasons to do a community archive, but right now we're in the middle of Silicon Valley and they just discovered us. And so we know that if we don't document and preserve the history now, it will be lost. It will be lost forever. And the spirit underlying the creation of the archive is by East Palo Altans for East Palo Alto. And for those of you who are not from this area, East Palo Alto is like 3 miles, actually north, but it's called East Palo Alto. And it's just on the other side of the Bayshore Freeway. And we went through a really intense community-involved, engaged process to create a logo for the archive. And our technical partner was Idea to Form, a BIPOC-led community creative studio. And over the course of many, many meetings, we determined that we wanted the archive to reflect the elders, the past, the present, the future, and the spirit of the community. And so that part of the archive, which is the green, represents the past. It's the terms of the meaning links to the stewards, neighbors, elders, ancestors, in action, in celebration, and in victory, you know, the raised arms. With regards to the present, then you see the gathered village in action. So when you bring all the seniors together, it's our gathered village. And then when we look to the future, it really is the orange icon is the young people, youth, elders, again in action, celebration, and victory. And their future is gathered together doing, community work. And then when you put the past, present, and future together, you get that final logo that is the multi-generational village coming together, working together in an intergenerational way to preserve and maintain our story. Again, some of these slides just are not coming forward, but Sharifa Wilson's the former mayor of East Palo Alto. I myself was involved in many years in helping to incorporate the city, and am now also a co-manager. And what happens in this country is that stories get told in terms of individual people rather than the community itself. And so I just want to say over and over again that this is people's work. I have the mic, but I actually am the voice of people who are doing this work in such a magnificent way. Our archivist is here. I hope you meet her. She's a really, really talented person that has worked with us now for almost a year. And her name is Sonia Carlson. And I'll share with you some of the things that she's been able to accomplish in her role later in the presentation. You can see that this work does flow from the community. This is our community team, where we have representation from the various ages and genders and ethnicities and professional roles that you find fairly prominent and prevalent in our community. Our mission is to collect, share, promote, celebrate, and preserve the unique history of our community for future generations. Our vision is that we're an internationally recognized repository of historical information. And let me just say the word international is not just wishful thinking, but acknowledgement of the fact that all of the racial and ethnic groups in East Palo Alto are historically connected and tied to other nation states all over the globe. And so our vision is a dual vision. It's really about the archive itself, having visionary leadership, a professional management team, diverse multicultural programming, and engaged community in a sustainable financial future. But our vision also is of our community. What's the point of it? It's to realize a community that's inclusive and welcoming and connected and multilingual and multicultural, where residents learn about the past and collectively reimagine the future of our great town. And the guiding principles. All of these constructs and ways of being come out of a community dialogue and process. But, community first, building relationships, valuing diversity, forming strategic partnerships both inside and outside of the community, and then finally existing grounded in honor and integrity, being accessible and transparent and professional and reliable and accountable in serving our community. We invite people to share oral histories and physical artifacts with the archive, and things people can contribute to the archive based on how they document what we have defined as 8 historical periods, 7 social sectors, and 4 demographics that reflect the various dimensions of life in East Palo Alto. And just a moment about the history. Of course, the Ohlone Nation flourished in this region until the late 1700s, and after the discovery of gold, and you heard something about this earlier, there was state-mandated, he called it elimination, we call it genocide of the Ohlone people, so that probably from about 1830, 40, through about 1860, 70, about 90% of the population in this region, the Ohlone population, according to some authors, was decimated and destroyed. Beginning in the 1850s, after the demise of the Mexican-Spanish rancheros following the Spanish-American War, the first townships were created in East Palo Alto, and there were a series of townships up and through the Great Depression of the early 1930s. And then when we entered the 40s, of course, that's World War II. By then, East Palo Alto has a thriving Japanese community that is dealing in the agricultural industry. And of course, those families are all interred. And fortunately, after the war, a number of those families were able to return to the community and regain access to their properties and their holdings. But this was a devastating period in our history. And then in the early 1950s, the first black families moved into East Palo Alto, and within 10 to 15 years, East Palo Alto became a majority black community because of the redlining and the block-busting techniques in the real estate and the banking industries. And then now that we're a majority of the population in the 60s, this coincides with the national civil rights movement, Black Power movement internationally, the Pan-African movement, and so community control and black nationalism and black culture and African culture are centered in the life of the community, and we call that period the Nairobi movement. And then the Nairobi movement culminated in the incorporation of East Palo Alto. We were an unincorporated area ward of San Mateo County until the we became a city on July 1 of 1983. And there was, in that struggle to become a city, the community was divided 50-50. And the combination of this internal conflict plus the crack cocaine epidemic, just the first decade of the city's life, it was our nadir. But beginning in the early 1990s, there was new leadership, a new spirit of renewal and unification, and that began to lay the foundation for a revitalization process centered in economic development, centered in infrastructure development, and then also centered in community policing. We had one of the model community policing programs in the country by the time we finished. And then let me just also say that the final thing I want to lift up as really significant in the history is that the first Latino communities, citizens moved into East Palo Alto in the early 1970s. But by the first decade of this century, by about 2005, East Palo Alto had transitioned from a majority Black community to a majority Latino community. And the struggles that all of you have experienced where this dynamic has occurred, we've survived it. We have come to understand how to manage it, and we're one whole community working together to build a great future. We've determined out of a variety of methods and processes that we're going to do 6 kinds of programming. Culturals and festivals, celebrations and festivals, lots of community education, like what's already been reported for the archives that were shared on the panel today. Want to be intentional about the intergenerational school programming. So we'll work with the schools to document the multiple histories of the cultural groups in East Palo Alto, or the demographic groups in East Palo Alto. Living arts, we want to create space and venues for current artists, young artists especially, to have an opportunity to share, to grow, to develop, to thrive, and not only as artists, but as business people in their various fields. We want to play a role in building the field of community archiving in the Bay Area. We want to join the crew of people that are already working on this, but also play a role in connecting people and then creating the capacity in the Bay Area for every community that wants to do a community archive to be able to do it with our collective support. And then lastly, what may be a little unique about us, we know that most community archives have a small core of under-resourced people who do really, really, really great work. But it's not feasible that a small group of under-resourced people can document an entire community. And so what self-archiving means to us is that we'll be launching a campaign, and we're now in a field test of that campaign for individuals to step up and take the leadership in archiving their own family story or their own organization story with our technical and professional support. So we're hoping that by popularizing the archiving process at the grassroots level, that individual community members both to collect and preserve their own family or organizational story, but also then to be a part of a broader community process to make that happen. And so we think we'll be able to more rapidly document and preserve the story of the community through this process. And it'll be much more authentic because it'll be by, for, and of East Palo Altans, which is our driving thing. And so what's our process? 3 phases. The first phase was a listening phase where we collected information from the community about what the archive should be and what it should do. The second phase, which is now, which actually ends at the end of June of this year, was to design the archive, and we'll share in a moment how far we've come in moving the archive forward. And then on July 1 of this year, we will open the archive, first the digital archive, and we're in the process of building partnerships and relationships so that in the next couple years, throughout the community, there will be physical locations, spaces for the location of physical archival material. And during the listening phase, where we talk with the community, our key findings were that people wanted a community archive that reflects our cultural diversity, that portrays our community spirit and community life, remember the icon, right? That is authentic and accessible, and that serves all age and cultural groups. And then in this phase, the questions that have guided our work are what is the mission, vision, guiding principles and goals? What are the best practices and lessons from the field? So we did a national scan, and we actually visited archives all over the country just to get a better understanding of how to do this work, because none of us, other than our archivists, knows this field professionally. And then we, wanted to answer the question, what collections are needed to tell our story? What types of programs do we offer? What's going to be our marketing and communication strategy, our governance and management structure, and the financial forecast for the archive? And the goals in this phase, which again ends in June of this year, was to develop our digital archive and social media strategy, do oral histories, collect oral histories, begin to collect physical materials, which we have, to establish our legal structure and governance structure, to launch the self-archiving program, and to write a business plan which would guide the development of the archive over the next 3 years. And what's our progress toward these goals? There's our archivist again on the right, but she's scanning 3D objects, clothing, newspaper clippings, photographs, all the kinds of physical materials that we can acquire. And we are getting started, but we have collected 1,462 physical objects that have been digitized and are currently in our archive, organized into 20 collections. We are hosting and sponsoring events to engage the community. So this is an event where we're going to invite community members to come and bring physical, historical materials or objects, and we'll scan them and get them into the appropriate collection. And everything we do is actually in 3 languages. You're only seeing 2 here. It's English, Spanish, and some combination of Tongan and Samoan. We're doing oral histories, and as of this date, we have over 35 oral history recordings conducted from individuals who lived or worked in the community. We have 17 donated videos received of past events. And let me just say, one of our 3 biggest challenges is that those of us who are elders, all of our stuff is on old floppy disks, or similar stuff. And so we got to figure out how to get that stuff modernized so we can get it all into the archive. That's one of our 3 biggest challenges. The legal structure, we've gotten our 501c3 tax exemption from the Internal Revenue Service. We've formed a founding board. The initial founding board is community members only, with a long history of civic engagement. A lot of them were in that original photograph that you see as a community team. But fairly soon, we're going to expand from a local board to a regional board, and we will form a Friends of IPACA, an advisory group to support the development of the community archive. And then this just talks about the self-archiving program. We're in a field test now. 8 individuals on behalf of their organizations, businesses or families are actually going through a self-archiving field test. And in the field test, we're asking them to complete and share about 3 hours of oral history video recordings around the story that they want to tell, and at least 10 physical artifacts. We have written and approved a business plan that has the following sections: the profile, the environmental scan, the nature of the collections, the programming, the marketing communication strategy, something about the legal structure, 5-year financial projections, and development strategy for the archive, and a call to action. And our sustainability plan, which is a part of that development process, we see our 3 main sources of income. Initially, it'd be grants, corporate sponsorships, and individual donors. But we imagine, I come out of an entrepreneurial background in the nonprofit sector, but we imagine that the archive has to generate earned income so that it's a fairly critical part of the total revenue generated by the archive, within 3 or 4 or 5 years, and we think by entering the community archive field and helping to popularize community archiving and then helping people learn the self-archiving process, that may be a way for us to generate income and build really strong, enduring partnerships over time across the Bay Area. And the final thing I'll share is about the digital archive. We launched channels. And again, Idea to Form is our really incredible partner in this work. We produced a social media campaign where 9 individual videos are captured, where people talk about their history, their life, their love, what they imagined for the community of East Palo Alto. Again, a very, very community-engaged process, like we did with the development of the LOCO, have created a website, and the website will launch when we open up the digital archive in a 2-day celebratory event on July 1 and July 2 of this year. And so the website will formally be launched, the full website at that time. And what you see on the right are the community members that were engaged in the design of the website process. Idea to Form use these approaches, defining the personas, journeys, wireframes, mock-ups, all those things were part of the website development process with the community. And then, again, it's going to start, the website is accessible now, but it'll be fully launched in July of 2022. And it's by East Palo Altans for East Palo Alto. They filmed a how-to video, which basically says, we need for you to support the archive, to share your stories, and this is how you do that. And there's a little promotional video that's been done to invite the community to participate. And what about our future? Probably through this year and early into next year, we're going to do these. We're going to continue collecting histories, scanning events, artifact collection, expand the self-archiving program, grow the social media presence, develop and engage and activate the board and expand the board, kick off our fundraising drive, and launch the full website and plan the celebration event, the launch event, which is now being planned and underway. And then over the next couple of years, of course, we'll hire staff, open the physical archive, and we'll implement the business plan, as I've said. And we have this incredible team of people who love us, who support us, who bring their spirit, their professionalism to our work. And Ariane Bertrand at Emerson Collective is our advisor or tech partner around project management. And let me just give a shout out to the Emerson Collective. They are financing the whole developmental process for the community archive. That's why we're able to make the progress that we're able to make in such a short period of time. Idea to Form, the partner is Thomas Alvarez. And we have an archivist from UC Santa Cruz. Is she in the audience? Is Teresa? Please, let's give her a round of applause. She's been our advisor around the development of the archives for a while now. And multimedia is Jesse Northfleet. The community sponsor is Emerson Collective, and our fiscal sponsor until we build an infrastructure will be One East Palo Alto. And this is how you can reach us, at email, at the website, and at our social media connect. So it's just, once again, an honor and a pleasure to share this platform with Kelsi and Carli. Great work that you're doing, and I look forward to our partnership too. Thank you.
I have a question for Frank. I'm a historic resources consultant and resources consultant, and so I saw your one slide that had periods, had themes, had groups. Does East Palo Alto have a historic context statement?
Yeah, we wrote it's called a concept paper.
Historic context statement is so that you can identify your built resources. What's your inventory of your historic buildings?
I can't answer that question because it's a technical one, but I'm certain that our archivist has done that.
Well, yeah.
Whatever that is,
Whatever
we
that
think
is?
we're on the right track
Well,
with
okay,
that.
we'll talk. because you're a long way to having that, and that's good with gentrification to be able to say these buildings don't come down because they represent our history. Yeah.
So I can't answer the technical part of your question, but I've noted it, and if you'll give me your email address or something I'll get it to you tomorrow. I'll get the answer to you.
Hi there, and thank you both for all the work that you do and the legacies that you represent. I think you both do really important work. My question is for Carli, and the work that my organization does, the Bay Mike Community Foundation. It's about LGBTQ history here in San Jose and Silicon Valley. We really depended on the access of the libraries and the archives at San Jose State. And when you talked about your Black Spartan project, it really made me think about the importance of the dissemination of information and stuff like that to the community. Because I remember when I was a student at San Jose State in 2019, just like you had that display of Black Spartans in the library, there was also one for the LGBTQ community. And my question is, how do you view, archives or institutions that kind of, put a paywall or, sort of walled gardens to these kinds of information? Because, as an organization, we've experienced difficulty collecting, what we would call our history. And I just want to know, how do you think we can combat that? What should institutions and community archives be approaching that kind of issue?
Thanks for the question. Is the mic on? Okay. I personally, every archive has their kind of reason for existing, as maybe every archivist does too. And for me, I came out, I was trained, the first archive I ever interned in was the Freedom Archives, which is a community-based archive in San Francisco. And so it never occurred to me that you would ever want to collect anything in an archive and do the work that it takes to find things and make decisions about them and catalog them and everything that it takes to archive something and not make it available to everyone. I remember my first day of the internship, I came across some information that just blew my mind, and the archivist, who was my supervisor for the internship, checked in with me over lunch, saying, how are you doing? And I said, I'm restraining myself from going out on the sidewalk and dragging people in here because I want everyone to see this. I just want to give everyone a box and say, dig in. And so that's my personal motivation. And so it was very important to me to work in an archive that was open to the public. And I'm very proud that the archives at San Jose State are open to everyone for free, without any kind of long interview about whether or not you deserve to see the archives. I really believe in, we're not saving these for some, theoretical future really important researchers. If you're here right now and you want the information, we want to make it accessible to you. I don't know that, should we dictate that to every archive? I think every archive has a particular reason for existence. And so I don't know that we can impose that principle on certain archives, but I think advocating as much as we can for access and supporting archives that are working towards providing that access is something that we can do. Did that sort of answer your question? Okay.
Thank you both for wonderful presentations. Thanks to Kelsi. I actually know her. I'm really familiar with them. I had a couple questions for Carli. One is, do you know about Faircita Hall's family?
No.
Okay. Well, we'll talk about it more, but she came from an extraordinary family. First of all, her parents were connected. Her father's brother was a pioneer, one of the first families to settle in Allensworth. Her brother, Marcus Hall, was an opera singer, and his collection is at AMLO. And her sister, Tarai Hall Pittman, was married to a dentist and was president of the Bay Area NAACP for many years, had a radio show. She was renowned. They lived in Berkeley, and the branch of South Berkeley branch of the Berkeley Public Library is named after her sister. So when you're putting materials together, there's always more research, right? My other question was about, I wondered if track athletes are overrepresented in what you found at San Jose State because of its role, in creating Speed City and creating all those track geniuses.
Thank you for that, Susan. I always learn something from you, which is why I always appreciate being in a room with you. It's interesting, there are a lot of track stars in the time period. There are a lot of Black track stars in the time period that the current research covers. And I am not a sports historian at all, but I was surprised to see, and others have expressed surprise to see, how many student athletes were excelled in multiple sports at the same time. So if you were a track star, you're also a football star and a basketball star, or basketball and boxing, or football, basketball, boxing, and track. And so I would say, yes, the track program is strongly represented. That had a lot to do with the reputation of the track program, I believe. And none of these students only played one sport.
For your self-archive, what types of instructions do you give? I asked because earlier Ms. Susan Anderson warned us about people not collecting oral histories correctly. So I wondered if there's a way, if you have instructions for people who are self-archiving.
So I've said several times that the professional team that supported us, and we're not professional archivists, have been incredibly helpful in that support. So we hired and were trained by an oral historian who worked with the community to develop an oral history toolkit. And then members of the community team doing oral histories were trained, first through a field test, and then trained on the use of that toolkit. And that was for the traditional oral history, let me just call it process, the standard oral history process. And so then our archivist, using that as a guide, has developed a self-archiving oral history toolkit so that the standards and practices that govern oral history doing also is reflected in the self-archiving work that we will be doing. I'm not sure if that answers your question, but almost, and I wasn't able to answer the earlier question because I'm just not a professional, but I'm certain that in the team of people that work with us, there's not a question that there's not a point of view about and some experience that they can bring to addressing that issue.